Hey guys, tonight we travel back to a time when surviving the winter wasn't just about turning up the thermostat. It was about turning up your prayers, your layers, and your chances of not being eaten by wolves. Imagine yourself waking in the pre-dawn chill, your breath forming tiny clouds in a pitch-black room, your limbs stiff under a meager wool blanket that smells suspiciously like goat. Outside, the snow has buried the road again, and the nearest food is a mile away, across an ice-crusted field, of course. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is. I love reading that part. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're in a one-room timber cottage, the wind rattling the wattle and daub walls like a hungry ghost, the hearth dead cold. Outside, the snow muffles every sound, but inside, every board creaks with tension. You pull your cloak tighter. It smells of smoke and sheep fat. There's a crust of ice on the water bucket. It'll have to be cracked with a wooden spoon. Welcome to Winter the Medieval Edition. The sun hasn't risen, not that it makes much difference. The sky is pewter gray, and daylight in this season is more rumor than reality. You rub your hands together, not for warmth, it won't help, but as a kind of ritual. The fire must be coaxed back to life. If the coals died overnight, and they usually did, you'll need to rebuild it from scratch, using damp kindling and desperate muttering. Many medieval folks rose early, not because they were energetic, but because lying in bed was riskier than moving. Parasites loved warm places. Lice, fleas, even bedbugs found winter the perfect season to nest deeper in your straw mattress. And don't forget, rats always ready to cuddle if you didn't tuck your bread well enough. Fire starting was a delicate art. Flint and steel were the norm, but cold metal in colder hands meant you might spend an hour just getting a spark. Some used a firepot technique, smoldering moss wrapped in ash to preserve embers. Others relied on dried dung as fuel. Yes, cow patties, nature's little briquettes. Historians still argue whether these methods were more common in rural huts or urban slums, but the smell left few guessing. You shuffle to the hearth, which is more pit than fireplace. Chimneys were luxury items. Most smoke went straight into the room, up through a hole in the roof if you were lucky. Soot clings to your nose hairs. Your eyes water. You cough once and the chickens in the loft cluck in irritation. The kids, if you have them, are wrapped like mummies in old cloaks and wool scraps, still asleep or pretending to be. Their breath fogs the air like tiny ghosts. Your partner shifts under the covers, letting out a groan that means your turn. It's always your turn. Finally, the fire catches. A thin thread of heat crawls into the room. You hold your hands to it, like a prayer, watching it flicker weakly. You're not out of the woods. The door is frozen shut, and you'll need to fetch more fuel. The woodpile outside is a frozen lump under snow. You're tempted to burn the stool. Outside, your world is whitewashed. No bird song, no color, just snow, brown slush, and sky. The nearest neighbor is a mile away and already buried. Their elderly father this week died in his sleep. or maybe just stopped waking up. There are no snowplows, no salt. Roads vanish under drifts. Travel is a gamble. People mark paths with tall poles or trudge in single file behind a neighbor's fading boot prints. The village priest has already fallen twice this week on the icy path to the church, and that was before the frost cracked his chalice. Your breath whistles in your nose. You see your cow, if you're lucky enough to have one huffing steam in the byre. She needs milking, and the pail is still frozen from yesterday. You can't help but chuckle softly. You're still alive, after all. Medieval winter wasn't a season. It was a siege. Each day was a skirmish against your own walls, your own fire, and your own frost-bitten toes. But this morning, you've managed to light the fire, break the ice, and not freeze your fingers off. That's already a win. And tomorrow, well, we'll see if the fire survives the night. You manage to get the fire going barely. It's not roaring, it's sulking. A few orange fingers dance above damp twigs, crackling more in protest than in cheer. But it's enough to thaw the morning chill from your bones just slightly. You glance over at your sleeping bundle of family. They're still curled up, stubbornly preserving warmth. You envy them, but someone has to be first out of bed, and it's always the one who complains the least. As you shuffle across the rush-strewn floor, your bare soles sting against the cold-packed dirt. Some wealthier homes had floor tiles or wooden boards, but for most it was earth. And in winter, that earth was as unforgiving as frozen stone. You pull on your outer layer, a patched tunic that was probably brown once but now wears the color of eternal dust. Layering is your only shield against the cold. Wool underclothes a second tunic if you're lucky, and a cloak pinned at the shoulder with a bit of iron. There's no winter wardrobe, just the same threadbare garments stacked like onions. Most clothing was handed down, stitched up, and restitched again. If it didn't scratch, it probably wasn't working. And don't even think about washing your clothes. Not in winter. Water freezes solid in the basin. The idea of plunging your hands into it, that's madness. You might as well rub snow on your body and call it a spa treatment. Shoes. You mean turn shoes, soft leather footbags that soak up snow like sponges. If you're rich or cunning, you've stuffed them with straw for insulation. Some medieval folks lined their boots with animal fat. Slippery, smelly, but oddly effective. Historians still debate whether peasants ever wore felted wool boot wraps, or if that was reserved for colder regions like the Alps or Russia. You wrap a scrap of linen around your head more for windburn than style. A woolen cap follows, lumpy but warm. Ears uncovered are ears soon lost. Frostbite might not be understood yet, but everyone knows someone whose fingers turned black and fell off. Outside, your breath fogs instantly. The wind doesn't howl. It whispers sharp little insults against your cheeks. You trudge to the latrine, a structure best described as pit with aspirations. It smells no worse in winter, just differently, like sour ice and buried sin. You do your business quickly, while hopping from foot to foot. Returning to the house, you notice your neighbor hauling firewood. He's hobbling, wrapped in what looks like 3 cloaks and half a sheepskin. He gives a stiff nod. "Fine morning," he says, teeth clacking. You respond with a grunt. Words waste breath. Even inside things don't warm up fast. Medieval buildings bled heat like sieves. Thatched roofs, poorly fitted shutters, and uninsulated walls made the average cottage a glorified wind tunnel. A fire could warm your hands, but never your toes. Those stayed numb until spring. Some folk hung tapestries or heavy cloth along the walls to keep out drafts. The rich called them erases. The poor called them that bit of sack we nailed up last year. Still, anything helped. Heat rose, so sometimes people slept on lofted platforms above the hearth. Others gathered under one heavy blanket, children, dogs, grandparents, stacked like spoons in a communal soup. You pour a bit of ale into a clay mug. It's more slush than liquid. Water would freeze faster, but even ale isn't immune. There's a joke you once heard. You know it's cold when the rats wear mittens. You chuckle, but not loudly. Your lips are starting to crack. A piece of bread sits on the table, hard as roof tile. You gnaw at it carefully, breaking off tiny pieces with your back teeth. This is winter fare dried, pickled, salted, fresh as a summer dream. Butter, if you have any, is a pale gray lump in a pot somewhere, probably next to the milk that turned itself into cheese overnight. Congratulations, you've discovered fermentation by accident. You step closer to the hearth again. The fire is still sulking. You prod it with a stick, hoping it doesn't die out. It's not just warmth. It's your cooking, your light, your morale. If it goes out, you're back to begging a spark from the neighbor, and they'll make you pay with labor gossip or both. Some towns had communal ovens that burned all day. In those rare moments of village cooperation, women brought dough wrapped in cloth to be baked. But in winter, even those ovens might be shuttered too costly, too hard to fuel. So, it's flatbread, over open flame, or porridge if you've got oats left. You ladle some into a cracked bowl and hope it thaws your face. Children stir, dragging themselves from the warmth of the bed pile. Their hair stands in frosted whirls. You help them dress, scolding gently as they yawn and complain. They don't know the fire nearly died last night. You don't tell them. Outside, you hear a rooster crow. Even the birds sound tired. Somewhere in the distance, a bell tolls morning prayer, perhaps. Or just someone giving thanks they made it to another dawn. Your hands are red with cold, your nose dripping your feet, tingling painfully as they slowly thaw. But the fire is lit, the children are up, the day has begun. You survived another wake-up in a medieval winter. Congratulations! Only 70 or so more until spring. You know the drill now. Layer up stoke, the fire gulp, something vaguely warm, and try not to let the cold swallow you whole. Today, your task is simple enough. Survive while dressed like a wool-wrapped scarecrow. Medieval winter fashion wasn't about making a statement. It was about not becoming one, specifically a frozen one. You pull on an overcoat, if you can call it that. It's thick wool, stained and patched beyond recognition, with a hood that droops like a monk's cowl. Under that, a tunic. Another tunic, possibly a third, if the laundry pile hasn't frozen solid. You wrap a sash around your middle, not for style, but to hold your kidneys in and your layers together. And let's talk about those layers. You're basically a human onion. And yes, you will cry if you have to undress later. Your underclothes are linen, though in truth, they feel more like cold parchment. Wool scratches, but it insulates. And the more scratchy you are, the warmer you feel. Or so the grandmothers say. Historians still argue whether undergarments were standard among peasants or a luxury of the better off. Judging by how cold your thighs are, you suspect the answer is sometimes, but not enough. Outside snowflakes drift lazily, each one a tiny, unique insult to your plans. You wrap a scarf, a long strip of wool, technically a muffler around your mouth and nose. You look like a burglar. You feel like a mummy. But at least your breath isn't freezing your upper lip anymore. Children are the real fashion victims here. They wear whatever fits, usually things that don't. Tunics that drag behind them, sleeves rolled so many times they look like accordion players, hats too big or too small. Babies are swaddled tight in wool and set near the hearth, rotated like loaves of bread to avoid freezing one side. Wealthy folks had fur-lined garments, gloves, and fine boots. You have none of that. You've wrapped bits of wool around your hands and tied them off with twine. They're more hand mittens than mittens. You flex your fingers, bad idea. You've lost feeling in two of them already, and it's not even midday. The most absurd part of winter dress. It barely helps indoors. Stone walls and open rafters turn castles and cottages alike into ice boxes. No insulation, no glass windows, just oiled parchment or wooden shutters. You can feel the draft creeping in, like a nosy ghost whispering, "You'll never be warm again." You shuffle outside to fetch something would water dignity. The snow crunches under your turn shoes soaked through from yesterday's slush. You imagine curling up in a fur-lined cloak like the bishop's. Of course, he's likely just as cold under all that pageantry, but he gets to pretend he's not. Some people wore foot wraps, strips of cloth wound tightly around feet before putting on shoes. They worked until they didn't. Once wet, they froze stiff, and you might as well have strapped bricks to your ankles. Others tried greasing their shoes with animal fat, a messy, odorous attempt at waterproofing. You pass your neighbor's house and spot a man on the roof, patching thatch with frozen fingers. His breath steams like a kettle, his movements slow. He waves accidentally, drops his bundle of straw curses in a dialect that sounds like medieval poetry. You wave back with a mitten stump. Fur was the gold standard of winter wear. Fox, rabbit, even squirrel, anything with a warm pelt and poor decision-making skills. But furs were expensive and often regulated. Laws, in some regions, restricted who could wear which furs, sumptuary laws they were called. If you wore sable as a peasant, you risked fines or worse. Historians still debate whether enforcement was strict or more symbolic. You decide not to test it either way. Cloaks with hoods were standard, but let's be clear, they weren't magical. Rain and snow seeped in, adding weight and misery. Some travelers carried cloaks lined with straw for insulation. Imagine wearing a haystack to town. Effective? Possibly. Fashionable? Decidedly not. And then there were the improvised solutions. Extra socks tied around calves, sheep wool stuffed into tunics, even hot stones tucked under cloaks before a long walk. One farmer you knew swore by stuffing moss in his hat. Keeps the wind out and the ideas in, he'd say. Despite your efforts, you're shivering. You keep moving because movement means circulation. Stand still too long and you'll seize up like a door hinge in need of oil. And good luck explaining to the village healer while your toes turned blue. Their solution: rub it with lard and pray. Children run past you giggling despite the cold, chasing each other through the snow like frost-proof sprites. You smile. Maybe there's magic in youth, or maybe they haven't realized their mittens are made from old socks yet. As the wind picks up and your nose starts to drip again, you tug your hood tighter and trudge on. Another day in medieval winter fashion, itchy heavy and barely better than being naked. But hey, at least you look like everyone else. The fire is sputtering again. You throw on another damp log and hope it doesn't just sulk like the last one. The house smells like wet dog and ashes, and your stomach has started its morning monologue, loud, dramatic, and entirely unhelpful. Time to deal with the second most urgent problem of the day: food. Welcome to medieval winter dining. If you were dreaming of warm stews and endless roasts, you'll need to go back to sleep. In winter, eating was mostly about endurance. The menu was short, the ingredients shorter, and the spice rack consisted of salt maybe. You poke through a storage chest near the wall, its lid crusted with frost. Inside are the dregs of your autumn harvest: shriveled onions, a few turnips that look like they're trying to escape, and some parsnips in questionable condition. You pluck one, give it a sniff, and decide not to investigate further. Bread is the backbone of your diet, even now. But it's not fresh, fluffy bakery bread. It's dense, sour, dark as a thundercloud, and hard enough to qualify as a weapon. Still, it fills your belly and can be softened if you have something to dip it in. Porridge. Only if there's grain left. Soup. Only if you stretch it with water and imagination. Ale. Your old friend waits in a wooden jug near the door. You tap it and hear a disappointing slush inside. Freezing beer isn't just a modern barroom joke, it really happened. Winter could turn ale to slop and wine to vinegar, especially if you weren't storing it right. Some folks kept jugs under blankets, others near the hearth. You suspect yours was stored near a malevolent spirit. And then there's fasting. Not voluntary, mind you. Between religious restrictions and empty cupboards, fasting was both pious and unavoidable. Certain days lent Advent. Wednesdays, Fridays meant no meat, no dairy, and no fun. You could eat fish, but unless you lived near a river or had preserved stock, that meant salt cod, a food so dry it could double as roof shingles. Historians still debate how strictly these rules were followed by the peasantry. Clergy tried to enforce them, but hunger has always trumped theology. You remember a neighbor who once boiled a rat for medicinal purposes. He claimed it cured his cough. It definitely cured your appetite. Today's sees feast. A thin stew of root vegetables, thickened with yesterday's bread and whatever herbs you remembered to dry before the frost hit. It smells earthy and unconvincing. You ladle it into wooden bowls and call the family over. They eat without complaint. Hunger smooths out pickiness. Your youngest even smiles. That's either gratitude or hallucination. Wealthier households fared better, of course. Their pantries held smoked meats, cheeses, pickled vegetables, and imported goods. A castle might host a winter feast with venison pies, spiced wine, and candied fruit. You, however, are lucky if you find a worm that hasn't frozen solid. And yet, there's a strange beauty to this austerity. Meals are quiet, reflective. The fire hisses softly. Steam curls from your bowl like a genie too tired to grant wishes. You chew slowly, grateful for warmth, however meager. After the meal, You break out a small piece of dried fruit, a rare treat. It's an apple, or it was once. Now, it's more of a challenge. But the taste is sweet, and your children grin like it's midsummer. You make a mental note to save a few for the Feast of St. Bridget next month. If you last that long, you recall stories of ancient grain shortages, entire villages scraping together acorn flour, mixing it with lard, and pretending it was bread. Or the sawdust loaves during times of famine when desperation bred culinary horror. Some of those tales are surely exaggerated. Others you fear are not. Your partner cleans the bowls with a cloth, then wipes the cloth on the edge of the bench. Dishes done. You share a look, equal parts exhaustion and quiet triumph. You've eaten. You're not sick. You still have turnips. You lean back the stew, warming your core. Your nose is still cold, but your belly is full enough. Outside, the snow continues to fall in lazy spirals. Inside, the fire glows faintly. Not a feast. Not even a proper meal, really. But in medieval winter, it's practically a banquet. Night falls fast in winter. One minute, you're squinting into the slate gray twilight, trying to finish some chore with stiff fingers, and the next darkness. Not cozy darkness, mind you. It's the kind that creeps under the door frame and waits for your candle to flicker out. There's no moon tonight, just a sky smothered in cloud and a cold that bites harder after sundown. Your family retreats to the sleeping pile. It's not much a raised wooden platform, if you're lucky, or just a mound of straw and flattened rushes covered in coarse blankets. You've added every wool scrap and cloak you own to the stack. Still, it's not enough. You lie down fully clothed. No one undresses in winter, not unless they're very brave or very foolish. Your toes already feel like pebbles. You curl into yourself, trying to preserve a bubble of warmth. The kids wriggle in jabbing elbows and icy feet in every direction. It's not comfortable. It's survival. Medieval nights were long, sometimes stretching up to 16 hours. And since candles and oil were precious, most people didn't waste them. You sleep in near total darkness, lulled by the wind, groaning through the walls, and the occasional creak of a beam shifting above you. Or a rat. Hard to tell. Sleep came in two parts. Historians call it first sleep and second sleep. You doze off for a few hours, wake up around midnight, then lie quietly, or chat, pray, or even sneak out. Not everyone stayed put. Some went to tend animals, stir the fire, or visit neighbors under moonlight. Others found more amorous ways to pass the in-between hours. The monks disapproved, naturally. Tonight, though, you're not getting up. The fire has dwindled to red glowing crumbs, and it's too cold to risk a barefoot dash across the room. You pull the covers tighter. Your breath fogs the inside of your hood. Mice scurry in the rafters. You think about putting the cat in the bed, but she's already claimed the warmest corner. Her purring sounds like smugness. The straw mattress pokes you. It hasn't been changed since midsummer, and you're pretty sure there's a chicken feather in your back. You shift, trying not to disturb the warm cocoon. Too much movement, and you'll let the cold in. Everyone knows that once it gets under the blanket, it doesn't leave. The wind howls again, and a shutter bangs open. You groan. Someone has to fix it before snow drifts in. You debate pretending to sleep until someone else moves, but the others are playing the same game. You lose. With a quiet curse, You slide from the warmth. Your feet hit the icy floor like stones in a frozen stream. You shuffle to the shutter, slam it shut, and tie it down with a rag. Your fingers throb from the brief exposure. Back under the covers, it takes 15 minutes to stop shivering. Some folk slept on heated stones wrapped in cloth. Others used dogs if they had them. Children often doubled as heat sources packed in tightly, like kindling around a flame. You reach over and pull one child's cloak back into place. He mumbles in his sleep, dreaming of something warm, you hope. Dreams are the only escape now. There's no warmth in the air, no softness in the bed, just the smell of damp wool and the press of your own breath. But you're horizontal. You're not actively freezing, and if you ignore the cramp in your calf, it's not the worst night. And so you drift, half asleep, half alert. The fire hisses quietly. The wind softens. Your breath slows. In a few hours, someone will rise to check the embers. You'll do it in turns, trying to keep at least one corner of the house from freezing solid. But for now, you rest. A night without blankets would be unthinkable. Even with them, it's more endurance than slumber. But you've done this before. You'll do it again. You close your eyes and think of spring, not the mud or the flooding, but the warm days that follow. It's not much, but it's enough to sleep on. Morning comes with a cough, not yours. Thankfully, this time it's your neighbors rasping through the thin walls like an omen. Winter is cruel to lungs. And in medieval times, it wasn't just the cold that threatened you. It was everything the cold brought with it. Sickness was a regular guest in your village, but in winter, it unpacked its bags and stayed for the season. The cold didn't cause disease, but it sure made it easier to spread. People huddled close windows, stayed shut, and fires smoked the air into a communal lung hazard. Every sniffle felt suspicious. Every sneeze earned a nervous glance. Today, your youngest is flushed and fussy. He's coughing nothing alarming yet, but your worry clicks on like a candle wick catching flame. You feel his forehead, warm, too warm. There's no thermometer, no pharmacy, just instinct and prayer. You boil water, toss in some dried herbs. Yarrow, maybe chamomile, or whatever the bundle in the rafters used to be. It smells vaguely medicinal. He sips it with a pout, then coughs again. Your stomach knots. When illness struck in winter, the options were grim. Village healers offered remedies ranging from the reasonable honey-warm compresses to the eyebrow-raising like rubbing mustard on your chest or sleeping with a split onion under your pillow. You once watched a man bury a live toad beside his house to ward off fevers. Did it work? Hard to say. The toad seemed unhappy. Hospitals, if you could reach one, were rare and far, and full of their own problems. They smelled worse than the latrine, and often hosted more death than healing. The monks meant well, but sterile technique hadn't been invented yet. Pus was considered a sign of healing, and washing hands was more ritual than hygiene. Historians still argue whether winter mortality spikes were due to the spread of disease or the body simply giving up under stress. Truth is, it was probably both. Your body, battered by weeks of cold and poor food, became a soft target. You think of past winters The time half the village caught the sweats, or that brutal year when your friend's daughter coughed herself to death over 3 nights. There were no priests that week, just whispered prayers and shallow graves. You wrap your son tighter in a cloak and sit with him by the hearth. He dozes off. His breathing evens out. You watch, counting seconds between breaths like it's the only thing holding back disaster. Outside, the village is quiet, too quiet. The usual morning clatter of chores is muffled. Someone's door creaks open, but no one calls out. This is how winter turns community into isolation. Each household becomes its own little world, waiting, worrying, wondering. And when illness came, people didn't just fear the sickness, they feared the blame. Gossip tied coughs to sin, bad luck, or cursed neighbors. That old woman with the one blue eye, clearly a witch. That boy who always finds dead birds, definitely suspicious. You've seen it all. You've heard the whispers. You change the rushes near your child's bed, sprinkle some dried mint around, and mutter a few phrases your grandmother taught you. Not prayers exactly, just the kind of half rhymes people repeated when they didn't know what else to do. Superstition and comfort often wore the same cloak. If things get worse, you'll call the healer. She's a good woman, sharp-eyed and gentle, with a pouch of dried fungi and bones no one questions too closely. Her hands are always warm. She smells like thyme and old paper. People trust her, mostly. But for now, you wait. The fire crackles softly. The child sleeps. You don't. There's something profoundly exhausting about winter illness. Not just the fear, but the helplessness. You can't fix it. You can't flee it. You can only endure and try to keep the fire going long enough for the fever to break. You lean back, stare into the fire, and listen to his breathing. Still steady. For now, that's enough. You'd think living in a castle during winter might be a step up. Stone walls, roaring fireplaces, servants to stoke the hearth, all the trappings of comfort, right, wrong. Castles weren't cozy. They were beautiful, defensible, and entirely incompatible with staying warm. If a peasant's hut was a sieve, a castle was a stone refrigerator. The cold didn't just sneak in. It moved in, redecorated, and hosted banquets. Today, you've managed to talk your way into the manor, for work repairing a crumbling stair, or assisting with the firewood haul. Anything that gets you out of the wind and maybe close to a noble's hearth. You cross the threshold and brace for warmth. It doesn't come. Instead, you're met by a chill so deep, it feels structural. The main hall is enormous high ceilings, stone floors, and drafty windows that rattle in their frames. Tapestries hang from the walls, but they're more for decoration than insulation. The air smells like candle wax wet wool, and something faintly roasted, probably the last pig they could afford. A noblewoman sweeps past in layers of velvet and fur, her cheeks flushed red from cold, not rouge. Her dress is stunning, but you can see her shiver beneath it. Her handmaid follows, clutching a brazier on a stick, like a portable campfire. It's more theatrical than practical. Historians still debate whether those little hand warmers were common or just courtly flair. Either way, the heat barely reaches her elbows. The lord of the house sits near the hearth, a fire roaring beneath a hooded chimney. You inch closer, basking in the radiant glow. It's the first real heat you've felt all day. The flames cast flickering shadows on the stone walls, but they don't chase away the cold that lingers at your back. Most rooms in the castle have no fire at all. Servants huddle in corners, breathing into their sleeves. Blankets are everywhere, stacked on benches, draped over shoulders, sometimes tied on like cloaks. You see a squire with a fur hat so large it might double as a pillow. Sleeping arrangements aren't much better. The nobles' chambers have a canopy bed with thick drapes, not for luxury, but for heat. The curtains trap breath and body warmth, creating a small pocket of tolerable air. You've heard they sleep with hot stones wrapped in cloth. You've also heard they share beds, not romantically, but for warmth. Even noble blood isn't immune to frostbite. In the servants' quarters, it's worse. They sleep in alcoves or on pallets near the kitchen, hoping the ovens will stay warm overnight. Some sneak extra logs, though being caught could earn you more than a scolding. Firewood is precious rationed and locked up. You help carry in another load from the yard, your breath fogging in the stairwell. The wood is damp, heavy, and covered in frost. Splinters dig into your gloves. You pass by the chapel. No fire allowed there by order of tradition. Monks whisper prayers with blue lips and chattering teeth. Holiness doesn't keep your toes warm. There's an old saying, better to be poor and near a fire than rich in a cold hall. It rings painfully true here. Nobles had more layers, better materials, and sometimes even heated stones hidden under the floors. But for most, even the finest hall was a theater of suffering in winter. You sneak a glance at the larder. The meats hang stiff and gray. The wine barrels have ice rings on their lids. A kitchen boy tells you they cracked open a salted fish yesterday and found it frozen solid. He grins like it's a punchline. It probably is. Meals here are hot, at least stews and pies and roasted game. The rich eat well, but they eat wearing gloves with the fingertips cut off, holding goblets like talons hunched over steaming bowls like starving cats. Everyone has a method, warming hands over a candle, tucking feet into cloaks, even wrapping heads in cloth like bandits. You're paid in bread and the chance to dry your socks near the kitchen hearth. It's a good day, and when you leave, stepping out into the crisp evening air, you almost laugh. The wind stings less than the stone walls did. The sky is clear and the moon is rising. You walk home fast, feet numb, heart lighter. Turns out castles may be grand, but a warm hovel still wins in February. The fire's holding, barely. You fed it a log the size of a piglet, and it's still acting like it's on strike. You wrap your hands around a bowl of something vaguely edible and try to ignore the cold creeping into your knees. But staying warm is just one part of survival. In winter, people didn't stop working. They just had to get creative. You pull on your outer cloak and step outside. The wind is calmer today, though that might just mean the next blizzard is taking a smoke break. The village is stirring. Smoke curls from chimneys. A cart squeaks in protest as someone drags it down an ice-slicked path. The world is white-gray and brown, the palette of endurance. Down the lane, a blacksmith bangs away in his forge. Sparks leap into the air like startled fireflies. It's one of the warmest places in town, though standing too close means a back wet with sweat and a front frozen solid. You nod to the smith as you pass. His beard is frosted and glorious. You're headed to the cooper's shop. Barrel making doesn't stop in winter, it becomes essential. Salted meats need storage ale, needs a home, and firewood gets delivered by the barrel if you're lucky. The cooper greets you with a nod and points to the stack of staves that need shaping. His tools are cold to the touch, and every metal part threatens to stick to your skin. You work slowly, carefully, blowing into your hands every few minutes. Medieval industry didn't shut down in winter. People just did things differently. Tanners scraped hides indoors surrounded by stiff leather and worse smells. Bakers worked with frozen yeast and cracked eggs over icy bowls. Weavers huddled near lamps spinning thread with stiff fingers. The candle maker's workshop smelled of tallow and determination. And then there were the traveling merchants. You hear the jingle of harnesses before you see them, two donkeys pulling a cart loaded with baskets and wool. The merchant shouts a greeting, teeth chattering mid-word. He's selling iron nails, wool yarn, and dried herbs, all wrapped in layers of cloth. His boots are wrapped in extra leather makeshift galoshes. He points to his cracked lips and mimes no talking, then grins. Markets still operated during winter, but sparsely. Towns set up small fairs when weather allowed, offering anything from smoked eels to linen scraps. You once bought a whole hare, wrapped in cabbage leaves, chewy but memorable. Today's merchant is offering dried apples and buttons carved from bone. You buy 3 apples. 1 is soft, 2 are rocks. Back at the workshop, you take a break by the brazier. The cooper's apprentice is carving runes into the bench with a knife tip. You warn him off, but he grins and says, "Keeps me from freezing." You can't argue with the logic. Not all trades endured. Farmers mostly waited, repaired tools, or mended fences between storms. Fishing slowed, though ice holes were cut in desperation. In colder regions, folks even cut and stored ice blocks, stacked them with straw to preserve for summer. A luxury in theory, but valuable in cities. Historians still argue whether ice trade was widespread in medieval Europe or more localized to certain river-rich regions. Either way, the idea of saving winter for later is delightfully backward. You help unload some wood barrels and stack them near the back. Your fingers throb. Your nose has lost all sensation. You imagine dipping it in warm porridge, just to see if it still exists. The village bell rings, once a signal someone's cow got loose, or maybe someone just rang it, for the fun of hearing something that wasn't wind or coughs. You chuckle. It echoes across the snowy rooftops like a lonely laugh. The day stretches on. Your body moves slowly but steadily. You earn a heel of bread and half a wedge of hard cheese for your labor. Not much, but honest. And the work, it helps. It keeps your blood moving, your mind distracted, your feet well. They're numb, but that's a given. As the sky begins its early fade to dusk, you pack up. The cooper claps you on the back, which feels like being hit with a wooden plank. You nod. Thanks, pull your cloak tighter, and start the trudge home. The road is slippery. You almost fall twice, catch yourself both times. By the time you reach your door, your breath is wheezing and your knees are complaining. But you've worked. You've eaten. You've moved through another frigid day. Medieval winter didn't let anyone sit idle. Work meant survival, and survival well. It's the only job that really matters. It's been a bitter week, but today the cold feels different, less biting, more theatrical. You step outside and blink in surprise. The river has frozen solid, not just crusted with ice, but sealed with a thick, glassy sheen stretching from bank to bank. You hear laughter, before you see the crowd. It's a frost fair. You shuffle closer, boots crunching snow. The air is alive with the sounds of merriment bells, ringing dogs, barking people, shouting over the wind. The frozen river has transformed into a temporary town, and no one wants to miss it. It doesn't happen every year, only when the freeze is deep enough for long enough. And when it does, everyone shows up. You pass a makeshift tent, really just sailcloth, over poles selling warm ale and barley cakes. The vendor's breath puffs out in clouds as he flips a smoking griddle. The smell is almost enough to make you forget your toes are numb. Almost. Children dart past, sliding on their bellies, shrieking with delight. A few older kids have constructed sleds, flatboards tied to ropes, and are taking turns hurling each other down the length of the river. One crashes into a barrel labeled wine, but the barrel holds only snow. The laughter doubles. There are stalls here too, set up hastily with planks and ropes selling dried herbs, salted meats, scraps of wool. A woman offers spoonfuls of warm broth for a penny. Another waves a deck of illustrated cards offering fortunes. She's wearing gloves with the fingers cut off, and you notice a ring tattooed on one finger. A sign she might have been a nun once, or just likes pretending. Historians still argue whether frost fairs were chaotic accidents or carefully managed events. Probably a bit of both. There's no official permit, just a shared instinct. The river's frozen. Let's do something stupid. You spot a man carving his name into the ice with a dagger. He offers to carve yours too for a halfpenny. You decline. Someone else has brought a fiddle, and soon the sound of music joins the din. People dance wrapped in cloaks and joy. It's clumsy and cold, but utterly human. You edge your way toward a game of trap ball, think ice hockey, with fewer rules and more shouting. Two teams, no uniforms, and a wooden puck the size of a cheese wheel. You watch as someone slips mid-swing and lands flat on their back, groaning like a haunted church bell. His friends cheer anyway. At the far end of the fair, a cluster of men are butchering a pig. Not an ideal sight, but practical. The meat is frozen solid already, which makes slicing both easier and harder. A boy walks past carrying a string of sausages like a trophy. He beams at you, eyes red from the wind. Not everything is cheerful. You see a man huddled near a small fire, holding out a cracked mug for coins. His face is thin, his boots patched with twine. People give when they can, but winter doesn't spare the poor. It just gives them a better view of everyone else having fun. You find yourself smiling anyway. There's something magical about this moment, how a frozen disaster becomes a festival. For one day, people can laugh, trade dance, and pretend the cold doesn't always win. A girl offers you a candied apple, shriveled but sweet. You trade a strip of dried meat for it and take a bite. It cracks your molar slightly, but the flavor is worth it. Your jaw aches, but your heart feels a bit lighter. Someone calls out a warning. You look up. A crack. Not loud, but unmistakable. The ice groans. People pause. A group near the center slowly backs away from a growing spiderweb of fractures. No one panics, not yet. But the party ends soon. The sun is already dipping, casting pink and gold across the river's surface. You watch as merchants pack up children, are herded back to shore, and the fires are stamped out. A fair like this can't last. But oh, what a day. You trudge home with frozen knees and a half-eaten apple, the echoes of music still in your ears. The frost fair is over. But for a few hours, the river wasn't just frozen. It was alive. It's the dead of night, and something's wrong. You feel it before you hear it, a prickle on your neck, a tightening in your gut. Then faintly from the woods, beyond the field, a low, dragging howl. Wolves. They've been circling for days now, drawn by the smell of livestock and desperation. With snow on the ground and hunger in their bellies, they're bold, and medieval winters give them every advantage. The nights are long, the forest deep, and the village gates are more metaphor than protection. You rise quietly and stir the fire. The embers flare, casting jittery shadows across the walls. The children stir under the blankets. You whisper for silence. The last thing you need is panic. You grab the torch by the door and strike it to life. It flickers weakly, but it's enough. Outside, the cold is knife sharp. You scan the tree line. Nothing moves, but you know better. Wolves are patient. They've watched you stack the firewood, heard the goats bleating in the pen. They know you're vulnerable. In the distance, another howl answers the first. Closer. You're not alone in your worry. Doors creak open along the lane. Neighbors emerge wrapped in cloaks and holding torches or pitchforks. One man has a shovel. Another clutches a cross. Superstition and steel medieval home security. Third time this month, someone mutters. You nod grimly. You remember the story of old Grenda's pig dragged into the woods before she could scream. And just last week, tracks around the byre, too big for dogs, too many for coincidence. Historians still argue how common wolf attacks were. Some think the fear was larger than the reality. Others point to records of entire herds, lost children, snatched shepherds mauled. Whether it was fact or folklore, one truth held: no one slept easy when the howls came. You check the animal pens. The goats are anxious eyes, wide and rolling. One is trying to climb the fence. The sheep huddle breathing in frantic clouds. You reinforce the latch and add extra wood to the fence. It won't stop a determined wolf, but it might slow one down. Another growl, this time closer. You raise your torch and edge toward the sound. Your feet crunch loudly in the snow. Every shadow could be fur, every tree a trick. Your heart beats hard in your throat. Then movement. A shape darts between trees, silent and low. You freeze. It pauses too. Yellow eyes glint from the dark. For a long moment, you and the creature just look. There's a strange calm in it, almost a shared understanding. You're both cold. You're both hungry. You both want this night to end. Then a shout your neighbor has thrown a rock wildly off target. The eyes vanish. The wolf slinks away, disappearing like smoke. You lower your torch, not sure if you're disappointed or relieved. Back near the house, the village is buzzing. Stories bloom instantly. Someone swears they saw 5 of them. Someone else claims a wolf looked them in the eye and spoke Latin. A third just shakes his head and starts reinforcing his door with a bench. You return inside. The children are still awake, eyes wide. You reassure them, lie a little. They're gone, just passing through. You tuck them in tighter, double-check the shutters and keep the torch close. The fire crackles. Outside, silence returns. But it's not the comforting kind. You know they'll be back. Maybe not tonight, maybe not this week. But until the snow melts, they'll haunt the edges of the village, lean, clever, and too desperate to fear men. And so you sit by the fire, watching the shadows dance, listening for the crunch of paws. In medieval winter, you didn't just fight the cold. You defended your door. You wake sore and aching, but you wake, which is something. The wind has calmed, and the sky outside your shutter is that strange, hopeful shade of winter blue, the kind that lies. You've errands to run today, and that means travel, which in medieval winter is an act of bravery just shy of madness. You pack what you need into a leather satchel, a crust of bread, a pouch of salt, a stub of beeswax candle, and your warmest prayer. Then you lace up your boots, still damp from yesterday, and wrap your legs in wool strips for extra padding. The roads are not kind to knees, ankles, or dignity. Outside, you eye the path ahead. It's not really a road, just a series of ruts and memories connecting one frozen village to another. You tighten your cloak and set off stick in hand, footing unsure from the first step. Snow has melted slightly and refrozen into an unforgiving crust. Your boots crunch and skid on the uneven surface. You slip twice in the first 100 steps, catching yourself both times on sheer instinct and a lucky stick jab. Already, your thighs are threatening revolt. Travelers in winter were rare for good reason. If you didn't freeze, you'd fall. If you didn't fall, you'd get lost. And if you didn't get lost, there was always the chance of running into something worse. Wolves, yes, but also robbers, fallen branches, floods, or that one guy with a donkey who insists on telling riddles. You pass a signpost half buried, leaning illegible. You think it says Thornwick, but it could also say turn back. You ignore the advice. Ahead, a pilgrim is trudging in the opposite direction. Wrapped in so many layers, he looks like a mobile laundry pile. You exchange exhausted nods. Neither of you stops. The roads are slick with hidden ice. You walk in the ditch. When you can, it's snowier, but safer. You hear a crack behind you and whirl, only to find a tree limb giving up on its career. You laugh mostly to stop from crying. Further on, a makeshift bridge crosses a stream. It's two planks nailed to a third plank over what looks like regret. You test the first step. It creaks. You test the second. It groans. You take a leap for the third and nearly lose your footing entirely. But you make it. You pause on the far side, panting, one hand clutched to your knee. You feel heroic briefly until you remember you're still 3 miles from anywhere that sells decent onions. Historians note that medieval travelers often wore crampons, not the sleek mountaineering kind, but iron spikes strapped to shoes. You have none. What you have is a deep sense of resentment toward ice as a concept. You channel this energy into your stride. At one point, you pass a milestone. It's tilted, covered in moss, and so old it might be Roman. It marks distance in feet, which is helpful only if your destination is exactly that far away. You pat it like a fellow sufferer and continue. On the horizon, you see smoke, a village, salvation, your destination, or at least a place with warm broth and a roof that leaks less than yours. But there's one more hazard: the hill. The last stretch is a slope gentle in summer, treacherous now. You dig your heels in, plant your stick, and edge forward like a suspicious goat. Halfway up, your foot slides. You flail, land on your rear with a sound like a slap drum, and slide the rest of the way down. Dignity 0. Speed excellent. You groan, check for injuries, none major, and try again. This time you take it slower. You reach the top, breathing like you've just carried a night uphill. You feel every muscle in your legs, every ache in your hips. But there it is, a cottage. Smoke curling from the chimney, a door that creaks open as someone spots you from the window. They wave. You wave back with what little energy remains. You made it. Traveling in medieval winter wasn't just transportation. It was a test of will luck and bone density. You passed, barely. Now, if only you didn't have to walk back tomorrow. You wake to bells, not church service bells, but something softer, distant, swaying, shaped by the wind. You lie still for a moment, letting the sound wash over you. There's something oddly peaceful about it. Then it hits you. Today is the feast of St. Vincent. Time to go to church. Again. You groan, swing your legs off the straw pallet, and immediately regret it. Your knees click. Your feet hiss. You feel like a knight's armor left out in the frost. But piety waits for no one, and in medieval winter, faith was sometimes all you had left. You dress quickly in layers that smell faintly of smoked goats and the vague hope of spring. Then out into the snow. The bells grow louder as you trudge toward the church, nestled in the center of the village. The roof sags under the weight of snow. A candle flickers in the window. The church is cold. No surprise. Churches were built to impress, not to insulate. Stone arches soar above your head, echoing every footstep like a ghostly drum. The floor is frozen flagstone. The pews are uninviting planks. You take your usual seat and immediately lose all feeling in your rear. Around you, the congregation filters in. Cloaks are drawn, tight hoods kept up. The priest emerges from the sacristy, wrapped in layers of wool beneath his vestments. His breath clouds the air as he greets the room. "Peace be with you," he intones. "And also with your frostbite," someone mutters. The service begins. Candles flicker on the altar, casting golden light on a carved wooden Christ. You try to concentrate, but your mind keeps drifting first to your fingers, still cold, then to your feet, colder, then to the floor, where a small puddle of melted snow is threatening to swallow your left boot. The priest speaks of endurance of hardship, of how winter is a test of the soul. You nod. He isn't wrong. He speaks in Latin, but with enough local gloss that most people get the gist. You pick up a few familiar phrases: fortitudo, misericordia, noli dormire. That last one means don't fall asleep. Good luck with that. The choir sings next. They're brave considering the state of their fingers. One boy keeps wiping his nose on his sleeve between lines. The notes echo beautifully, though the highest harmonies crack like ice on a roof. You close your eyes. It's almost soothing until your neighbor coughs directly into your ear. The homily turns to sin. Nothing warms a medieval crowd like a little fire and brimstone. The priest's voice rises. He warns of sloth gluttony and the perils of gossip. You shift uncomfortably. Everyone gossips. It's the village's second favorite winter activity after not dying. He reminds the crowd, that God sees everything. Everything. Even that flask of spiced ale. Someone snuck into their cloak. You glance sideways. Yep, old Tobias is sipping discreetly and offering none to the rest of you. Then communion. A procession of chapped hands and bowed heads. The wafers are cold and stick to the roof of your mouth like regret. The wine is sharp and bracing. You cough, eyes watering. The final blessing is short. Everyone's grateful. The priest's nose is bright red, his fingers visibly shaking. He offers a prayer for warmth, for health, and for the wolves to find other meals. You cross yourself automatically. Amen. Outside, people mill around for a moment, stamping their feet, complaining cheerfully. One woman announces her baby didn't cry once. He's frozen solid, her husband jokes. They laugh. Sort of. Historians often debate how central religion was in daily life. But here in the dead of winter, it's the glue. Faith, ritual, and community, they give structure to an otherwise bleak season. They remind people they're part of something bigger. Even if that something is just the choir hitting the right notes for once. You head home slowly, savoring the crunch of snow and the fact that for now, your soul is officially intact. The bells ring again, fading into the distance. Tomorrow, there'll be no service, just work, just cold. But for 1 hour, in one stone building, you were warm in spirit. By the time you get home from church, the sky's already leaning into twilight. Winter days don't dawdle. They pack their light into a hurried blink, then disappear again behind a curtain of gray. You tend the hearth, check the shutters, and begin the evening ritual gathering the family for stories. This is the part of winter you don't hate. Everyone clusters close to the fire, wrapped in cloaks and shared blankets, steaming bowls in hand. The room glows softly, flickering with the rhythm of the flames. Outside, the wind howls through the cracks in the eaves, but inside, there's warmth, not just from heat, but from memory, from rhythm, from voice. You begin with a tale your grandfather told you, who got it from his grandmother, who probably made it up on the spot one freezing January. It's the story of the Hollow Shepherd, a man who wandered the moors in winter and was followed by crows wherever he went. No one knew where he came from or why he never left footprints. You tell it slowly, letting the pauses breathe. The children lean in wide-eyed. One clutches your sleeve. The fire pops dramatically on cue. You smile inwardly. These stories are more than entertainment. They're armor. Against the dark, against boredom, against fear. In winter, when travel is too dangerous and daylight too stingy, storytelling becomes the village's favorite currency. And it spends well. Everyone has their specialty. Old Brim down the lane tells riddles that make no sense but sound profound. Your neighbor Marla prefers ghost tales, always ending with a knock on the door or a vanished footprint in the snow. Tonight, though, it's your turn. You move on to a tale about the snow saint, a woman made of frost who blesses houses with warmth if they leave her bread and curse them with bitter cold if they forget. There's no theology here, just a healthy mix of superstition and social guilt. You place a crust of bread near the door before bed, just in case. Historians still argue whether these oral traditions were rooted in older pagan beliefs, or simply made up out of sheer winter delirium. Either way, they served a purpose, keeping minds sharp and hearts steady when there was little else to do. You remember being told stories when you were small, bundled by the fire, sipping hot broth, your father's voice low and deliberate. You swore then. You'd remember every word. You forgot most of them, but you kept the tone, the rhythm, the glow it gave the dark. Now, it's your children who ask the questions. Did the hollow shepherd ever speak? Could the snow saint melt? Why does fire crackle? You answer each one as if it were sacred truth. Only once. Only if she cries, because it's telling its own story. Later, your partner takes over with a gentler tale. Something about a squirrel who traded acorns for mittens. The youngest giggles. You exhale, letting the warmth of the moment seep deeper into your cold, cracked skin. As the stories wind down, someone fetches a lute with half its strings. It's out of tune, but no one minds. A lullaby emerges, a minor tune with a familiar melancholy. You hum along. Eyes begin to close. Outside, the snow resumes its silent conquest. Inside, the world shrinks to the glow of the hearth, the hum of story, and the stillness of bodies at peace. You bank the fire, whisper one last line, and when they woke, the snow had vanished and spring had arrived and tucked the children into the pile of blankets. Winter still waits at the door, but tonight it has to wait a little longer. You've got stories to keep you warm. The fire is low, the children are asleep, and the village outside is silent under a fresh dusting of snow. You pull on your cloak again. It's your turn for the midnight patrol. Every town or village had one. Some poor soul responsible for walking the dark hours, while others dreamed. Tonight, it's you. The Night Watch. If that term didn't oversell the glamour. It sounds like a military rank. Really, you're a human alarm system with cold feet. You light the lantern with fingers that refuse to bend and push open the door. The wind greets you like an old enemy. You tuck your chin into your scarf and step into the slush. The village sleeps under white and moonlight. Chimneys still puff weakly here and there like exhausted sentries. You pass houses dark and quiet doors, barred windows shuttered with boards or bundled cloth. Somewhere, a dog barks once and then gives up. Your feet follow the usual route from the edge of the woods, around the commons, past the granary, and back again. It's meant to discourage thieves, check for fire, and occasionally remind wolves that someone's awake. Whether wolves care about lanterns and muttering men is another question. Your boots crunch with every step. Ice groans beneath the surface of the path. You pause at the granary. The door is still barred. No tracks around it except your own, and one set of deer hooves frozen in mid-panic. You add another log to the fire pit nearby, not for warmth, but for ritual. Historians debate whether these patrols were formal roles or informal traditions. Some towns paid a token fee. Others expected every able body to take a turn. You've never been paid. But the quiet of the village at night is its own kind of reward, occasionally on warmer nights. Tonight, you're mostly rewarded with numb thighs and the creeping suspicion your lantern is dimming. You keep walking. The chapel looms to your left, its bell silent. You bow your head as you pass out of habit or fear. The cemetery beside it is blanketed in snow headstones like teeth in a sleeping mouth. You don't look long. Nothing good ever came from lingering near graves in stories or in life. You hear a rustle. You freeze. Is it a fox? A drunk villager? You grip the lantern tighter. Then nothing. Just a loose shutter flapping against a frame. You chuckle to yourself, a sound like a rusted hinge, and move on. You pass the baker's house. A faint smell of yeast and ash clings to the doorframe. He'll rise before dawn to start the loaves. You nod toward his window in respect. The wind shifts. The lantern flickers. You pull your cloak tighter and start the return loop. Behind you, your footprints are already filling in. Snow doesn't wait. You check the well. No signs of tampering. The goat pen quiet. The smithy cold. Everything is still as it should be. Your fingers have gone entirely numb now. You switch hands with the lantern and flex them uselessly. You imagine warming them in a smith's forge or plunging them into a vat of stew. Then you remember your actual fate 2 more hours, then someone else takes over. If they remember. Back near your home, you pause. The stars are visible tonight. Tiny pricks of light, like holes poked in a wool blanket. You feel oddly small and oddly okay with it. There's something humbling about being one tiny light in a world full of dark and cold and choosing to keep walking. You stomp the snow off your boots at the threshold. Inside, the fire's still burning weakly. The children murmur in their sleep. You hang the lantern, stretch your aching back, and let yourself exhale. The night was uneventful, which means it was a success. No fires, no wolves, no missing chickens, no ghosts, thank the saints. You've patrolled the darkness, held your tiny flame, and walked the old loop, and for now, that's enough. Morning comes not with warmth, but with a sound, the slow drip of water from the eaves. At first you think it's a dream. Then you hear another faster, louder. A bird chirps outside. A real bird. You sit up and blink at the ceiling, half expecting to see icicles still hanging from the beams. Instead, you see a small leak forming above the hearth. The thaw has begun. Outside, the world is changing. The snow hasn't vanished, but it's sagging slushy, softening around the edges. Patches of muddy earth peek through like old secrets. The road is no longer white and crisp. It's brown, wet, and slippery. The kind of mud that doesn't just cling, but devours. You step into your boots and sink 2 inches with your first step. Lovely. The air smells different, damp, alive, like old leaves and promise. You spot the neighbor's goat pawing at a thawed patch of grass with the confused dignity only a goat can muster. Across the lane, Marla is wringing out wet blankets in the sun. Her yard looks like a battlefield of half-melted snowmen and fallen firewood. You squint at the sky. It's still gray. But it's a spring gray, not a deathly winter gray. You imagine what this place might look like in a few weeks. Buds on the trees, bees fumbling through the flowers, children running barefoot through puddles, forgetting the cold that kept them prisoner for months. But don't get too excited. The thaw brings its own nightmares, flooded paths, collapsing roofs, sick animals, and feet that stay wet for days. The mud will coat everything. Your floors, your clothes, your dignity. It will get into your stew. It will freeze at night and trip you in the morning. It is nature's slapstick repeated daily. And yet you smile, because the birds have returned, because the ice on the bucket cracked without needing a spoon, because the sun, for one glorious moment, broke through the clouds and lit up the trees with a light so golden it made the snow look ashamed. Spring will come late, the mud will stay long. But the cruelest part of winter, the silence, the deep cold, the sense that nothing would ever grow again, is fading. You head down to the river. The ice has broken into chunks drifting slowly like ancient ships. A boy is throwing rocks at them, pretending they're enemy boats. His laughter is high and piercing. You envy him. Your joints ache, your boots squish, your firewood is nearly gone. Your fire sputters, your limbs ache, and the last log is gone. But as dawn bleeds into frost and distant chimneys smoke again, you rise. Not because you're warm, but because you must find more wood. Survival demands it. And in this world, fire isn't comfort, it's currency. You're standing in the manor yard of a fog-shrouded village sometime in the 13th century. The sun hasn't risen, and the frost has settled thick over the thatched rooftops like a woolen blanket dipped in snow. Your fingers are already numb, and the only warmth in sight is the thin trickle of smoke curling from the Lord's chimney. You'd think life in a medieval manor would be cozy in winter. You'd be wrong. Before we delve into this chilly rabbit hole of ember hoarding and smoke-choked hallways, do me a favor. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere, especially frosty, or especially not post your location and local time in the comments, I love seeing where in the world you all are. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The frost clings to your boots as you trudge across the yard. It's still pitch black, but you can hear the faint shuffling of feet and the low mutter of servants. Their breath curls out like ghostly ribbons as they pass between the woodpile and the manor house, carrying armfuls of logs that leave trails of bark and splinters. Every log counts. You can feel it in the urgency of their pace. No one dawdles when the Lord's hearth must be stoked before he awakens. That fire tucked inside the great hall's towering stone chimney is the pulse of the entire household. It's not just for warmth, it's status survival and a kind of medieval timekeeper. If it's out, something has gone terribly wrong. And here's your first uncomfortable truth. Firewood was far from free. Even on a manor with its own woods, there were rules. Tightly controlled forests, known as forests royal, were often off limits. Gathering deadwood was one thing. Felling a tree could cost you a hand, or at least a season's worth of bread, the Lord's steward. A grim fellow with frost in his beard and a ledger thicker than a bread trencher oversees the firewood stores with the vigilance of a banker. He knows exactly how many logs are supposed to be burned each day. He knows who's been sneaking extra for their own fires, and he has absolutely no patience for cold excuses. You shuffle toward the great hall and step inside. The warmth hits you like a blanket made of steam and singed wool. The hearth crackles with a new stack of ash logs, their bark curling as flames lick upward. The fire here is ceremonial and functional. On feast days, it will be a beacon. On bitter nights, It is quite literally life-saving. But there's something else you notice. No one else is loitering here. The warmth is not for you. You're a guest, perhaps, or a lesser servant. The fire might be within reach, but the heat is not meant to linger on your skin. It's meant to rise, to impress, to show that the Lord's household can afford the burn. This winter morning is just beginning. You pass a young scullery maid brushing frost from a windowsill with the corner of her apron. Her fingers are red and raw, and you can't help but wonder how much of her day will be spent wishing she could sit by that hearth. Historians still argue whether households burned more out of necessity or prestige, especially when wood supplies were tight. Was the blazing hearth a comfort or a performance? Either way, one thing's clear. In a world without central heating, you either kept the fire going or you froze. The hearth is more than a fire. In the medieval world, it is the beating heart of the home. You stand in a small, timber-framed cottage, now far from the stone-cold grandeur of a manor. Inside, the air is smoky, almost gritty on your tongue, and the ceiling is low enough that your head nearly grazes a dangling bundle of drying herbs. A single fire crackles in a shallow hearth dug into the packed earth floor. There's no chimney, just a hole in the roof that lets the worst of the smoke escape, and even that seems overwhelmed. Your eyes water, but still, this room feels alive. Everything revolves around this fire. Meals are cooked in the iron pot that swings above the flames, suspended by a blackened hook. Boots and cloaks hang nearby to dry. A sleeping dog curls so close to the embers that you're amazed he hasn't singed his tail. And yes, when the sun sets early and the temperature drops further, entire families sleep around the hearth, packed like kindling themselves. You hear a mother reminding her child not to feed the fire too fast. Wood is precious, not just because it's scarce, but because it's everything. Without it, food stays raw, clothes stay damp, and fingers go stiff in the night. People don't say, "Keep warm." They say, "Keep the fire," because the fire is warmth. In wealthier homes, hearths divide and multiply. The kitchen has one. The hall has one. Even the buttery might have its own tiny brazier to keep fats from freezing solid. But no matter the size of the home, the hearth is always central, physically, socially, and emotionally. It's where stories are told, where deals are whispered, where gossip and secrets bubble up like stew. Quaint maybe, but also utterly practical. Without it, you don't just lose comfort, you lose function. The bread goes stale in hours. The baby cries harder. The cheese sours. Without fire, even time slows down, dragging its frostbitten feet. Historians still argue whether hearths were truly communal in larger households, or if the idea of hearth as home was more symbolic than literal for those who weren't permitted to gather near it. But if you ask anyone here, this mother stirring porridge, or her son feeding twigs into the flame, they'll tell you plainly, no fire, no life. And so the hearth stands, always burning, always watched. It must be fed like a beast, tended like a shrine, guarded like gold, because in winter, it's the only thing more valuable than sleep. You're in a clearing at the edge of a dense, ancient forest. The air bites at your cheeks. and the silence is broken only by the creak of cartwheels and the rhythmic chop, thunk of an axe splitting wood. Welcome to the unseen engine of medieval winter survival, the firewood economy. It's no marketplace with coin and scales. This is barter obligation and necessity, all cloaked in frost. Bundles of wood lie stacked and tied with fraying rope. Some are seasoned dry and golden ready to burn. Others are still green sappy and smoky. Men haggle not over coins, but over the number of armfuls owed in exchange for a day's plowing or 2 hens' worth of eggs. It may not look like commerce, but that's exactly what it is. Timber was the diesel of its day. Behind you, a boy no older than 10 drags a half sled of branches from deeper in the woods. He's not playing. He's earning the family's dinner, kindling traded to a baker in town in exchange for a warm loaf. The village economy doesn't run on gold, it runs on wood. You learn that entire communities schedule their winters around these transactions. The manor lord demands a certain quota from each peasant family, often paid in cords of wood rather than coin. The church exacts its own tithe. A holy fire must burn every evening in the nave during Advent, and someone has to supply it. And then there are the charcoalers, soot-covered figures who vanish into the forest for weeks, building slow-burning mounds that transform wood into the black gold of the medieval age charcoal. It's lighter, hotter, and longer burning than logs. Ideal for smithing and valuable enough to be transported across counties. You pass a roadside inn where the innkeeper tallies firewood bundles on a chalkboard instead of room fees. One bundle earns you a meal too, gets you a bed. The hearth inside roars, but not from generosity. It's fueled by every traveler who arrives bearing timber instead of coin. Historians still argue whether this firewood exchange system functioned more like rent or like tax. Was it forced obligation or voluntary barter? Either way, it created a parallel market that sustained daily life. So, next time you imagine medieval trade routes, think beyond spices and silks. Picture mules loaded with pine and birch. Imagine ledger books where 6 lengths of ash equals 1 piglet. Firewood wasn't just a fuel. It was a currency measured in splinters, sweat, and survival. The forest is quiet, but not peaceful. You're standing in royal woodland now, part of the king's domain, thick with oak ash and hornbeam. The moss is crisp underfoot, and a red squirrel watches you with suspicion. But you're not supposed to be here. Not without a permit, because these woods are protected by law, and not just any law. Forest law. One of the most feared and resented in all the medieval world. You hear a rustle. It's not the wind. A woman crouches low behind a fallen log, wrapping her arms around a bundle of dry branches. She moves like a thief, and in the eyes of the crown, she is one. Her crime? Collecting firewood. Not even cutting it, just gathering deadwood. And if the local forester catches her, she could be fined, flogged, or worse. You didn't expect fuel to come with so much danger, did you? In these designated royal forests, which, by the way, could include entire villages and farms, everything belonged to the crown. The deer, the trees, even the mushrooms. Common folk were forbidden from chopping trees or hunting game. Some were even barred from collecting fallen limbs unless it was for church use or with special permission. Violating forest law was no small matter. Punishments ranged from steep fines to imprisonment, and in earlier centuries, mutilation. That's right, cutting down a tree illegally could cost you a hand or an ear. Over time, the harshest penalties softened, but the risk remained. You learned to sneak, or to bribe. Forest officials, wardens, verderers, agisters patrolled constantly, keeping eyes on both wildlife and woodpiles. They'd track footprints, check baskets, interrogate entire households. And for many, avoiding them became a necessary winter skill. Back in the village, whispers abound. So-and-so's daughter was caught hauling greenwood near dairy copse. Old Janet knows how to hide bark under her cloak. If you carry your twigs with pine cones still attached, they think it fell naturally. Tricks like these became survival lore. Historians still argue whether forest law was truly about conservation or just another method of control. Did kings protect the trees for future use, or just to flex power over the peasantry? Either way, firewood theft was as common as bread making. Everyone needed heat, and when the law stood between you and your hearth well, a little rule breaking seemed more than fair. So you walk quietly now. You keep your bundle small, your eyes sharp. You don't run because running is guilt. You act like a widow gathering for a prayer fire, not a desperate mother trying to keep her child from freezing. And if a forester appears, you know just what to say. I only picked what the wind dropped. You find yourself standing in the great hall of a minor noble's stone manor. And though the fire crackles in an ornate hearth taller than a man, you still feel a draft nip at your ankles. The truth sets in fast. Even castles were cold. But that fire, it speaks volumes. Not just warmth, it's rank. In medieval society, how much fire you could afford and who could sit near it told everyone who you were. The hearth wasn't merely functional, it was political. In most noble homes, only the lord, his family, and high-ranking guests sat close to the flames. Everyone else, servants, messengers, and unfortunates like you, hovered on the periphery, clinging to the stone walls and trying to absorb stray wisps of heat. Even the design told a story. Simple folk might have a smoky pit in the center of the room. But here the hearth is raised, framed in carved limestone, with a flue that actually works mostly. The logs burning aren't just any logs, they're split oak, a hardwood prized for its long, clean burn. You can tell this family is comfortable, not rich, but respected. You glance up and notice something subtle, a smoke canopy hanging from the beams. It's meant to deflect soot away from the ceiling. It's rare, not a necessity, an aesthetic. And aesthetic choices, especially in heating, are privileges. A flickering status symbol. Outside the manor, peasants cluster around small hearths or communal fires. No embellishments, no canopies. Just blackened walls and singed thatch. The contrast couldn't be starker. In fact, many manor lords imposed strict rules about firewood. Servants received rations 2 armfuls per day, perhaps. If you ran out, you didn't get more. You wrapped your feet in rags and huddled under straw. Fire was not shared. Fire was managed. One of the most visible displays of wealth. A chimney, In the early Middle Ages, few buildings had them. Smoke simply rose into the rafters and exited through a hole in the roof. But chimneys, when they appeared, were expensive. A single flue carved into stone cost a fortune in labor and materials. So the ability to breathe clean air indoors became oddly enough a luxury. Historians still argue whether early chimney adoption was driven by practical need or elite mimicry. Did nobles install them to reduce smoke, or just to show they could afford to? Here's the kicker. The hearth dictated hierarchy even inside families. In longhouses or large cottages, elders or guests sat closest. Children and women, unless nursing, were often assigned the outer rings. Heat trickled out in social layers like concentric warmth privilege circles. So, when you imagine a cozy winter in the Middle Ages, imagine it with rules. The closer you sit to the flames, the more power you likely hold. And if you're standing where you are now, sneezing quietly in the shadows, you already know warmth was never evenly distributed. You duck through a narrow doorway and into the drafty interior of a stone castle. Not the storybook kind, with velvet drapes and blazing torches, but a real one, damp, echoing, and absolutely freezing. Your breath clouds in front of your face as you walk. Welcome to noble life in winter. Spoiler, it's colder than the barns. The walls are thick 3, sometimes 4 feet of stone, but insulation wasn't part of the blueprint. These fortresses were designed to keep enemies out, not heat in. Cold air settles in corners like a permanent guest. Tapestries hang from the walls in a feeble attempt to soften the chill, but they flap uselessly whenever the wind sneaks through arrow slits. The castle's main hall has a grand hearth, and yes, it's lit. But the fire's reach is pitiful. You stand just 6 paces away and feel almost nothing. A servant throws on another log, and the smoke lingers before being half-heartedly sucked into the flue. The castle's chimney doesn't quite know what it's doing. Upstairs, things get worse. You're led to the privy, a stone bench in a narrow turret with a hole that drops straight into the moat below. No fire, no curtain, just you, your freezing backside, and a stiff wind from the north. You suddenly understand why chamber pots were so popular. Even the Lord Solar, the private upper chamber meant for comfort, offers no escape. It has a small fireplace, but it's rarely enough. Heavy woolen tapestries, fur-lined cloaks, and layers of undergarments do their best, but nothing truly shields against the cold. You see a noblewoman warming her hands over a brazier, cheeks pink with cold teeth clenched. At night, everyone becomes a cocoon. Beds are raised on wooden platforms to avoid the draft from stone floors, and thick curtains are drawn around the frame, not for privacy, but to trap heat. Hot stones wrapped in cloths are slipped under the covers. Sometimes servants sleep nearby, just to provide extra body heat. But even in these conditions, fire is strictly rationed. The kitchen must have its flames. The main hall's hearth takes priority. Bedrooms and stairwells, not so much. You pass a scribe shivering as he copies a legal charter. Fingers stiff and ink frozen in its pot. He's wrapped in a cloak with a hood and mittens with slits for the quill. Historians still argue whether castles were colder than peasant homes Many believe they were simply due to their sheer size and stone construction. In smaller cottages, at least you could trap the warmth. In castles, it vanished into the vaults and crevices. So here you are in one of the finest residences of the land and your toes are numb. You'd kill for a wool sock, maybe even a second log on the fire. But those are reserved. Because while castles might look like fortresses of power, in winter, they're just elegant refrigerators. You're crouched now, in the shadow of a thatched peasant hut, somewhere in the muddy outlands. It's late evening, and the sun has vanished behind a curtain of slate-gray clouds. Inside, you hear laughter, thin, exhausted, but real. And then the sound of rustling straw. You push the door open carefully and step into a space that smells like smoke-boiled turnips and damp wool. Welcome to a masterclass in staying warm without the privilege of fire. The hearth is tiny, barely big enough to roast a rabbit. There's a single log, burning already, half consumed, its embers dim and stubborn. That log is tonight's only firewood. Tomorrow's, no one's sure yet. But the people here aren't shivering. Not entirely. They've learned to fight winter with creativity instead of kindling. The first trick is layering wool over linen, then a cloak, then another linen layer all patched together with thread that looks like it's made of hay. Next hay, literally. Bundled inside straw mattresses, it insulates better than you'd think. There are no feather beds here, just sacks stuffed with dried grasses and moss. Then there's the bed itself. Not one per person, one per everyone. A family of 6 might sleep under a single blanket, limbs tangled children, nestled in the middle for warmth. It's awkward sometimes, itchy, and surprisingly effective. Human bodies, after all, are decent radiators. You spot another trick. A flat stone wrapped in rags, recently pulled from the hearth and tucked at the foot of the bed. A medieval hot water bottle minus the water. And when they really need to warm up, they dance. Yes, dance. A few jigs before sleep gets the blood moving and the fingers flexing. One girl picks up a cat and tucks it under her tunic. It's not a pet. It's a portable heater with whiskers. Everyone laughs, and no one scolds her. The cat seems pleased, if resigned. When times get especially lean, they burn anything that'll catch dried cow dung, old shoes, even fragments of fences. You'd be amazed what counts as fuel when temperatures drop and desperation rises. A local story tells of a man who dismantled his own door for firewood and spent the rest of winter with a curtain of reeds. Historians still argue whether these winter adaptations were universally practiced or more regional. Did peasants in Normandy use hay beds the same way as those in Bohemia? Did every village share dancing as a warm-up ritual? The records are fuzzy, but the resilience is clear. You can't help but smile as the family gathers for sleep. The fire is dying, but they're not cold. They're prepared. You draw your cloak tighter, lie down near the wall, and close your eyes. You've learned something tonight. Comfort doesn't always come from the flames. Sometimes it's cobbled together from laughter layers and the surprisingly warm underbelly of a smug village cat. You're walking now beneath a canopy of bare branches, and every crackling footstep is muffled by a thin dusting of snow. At your side is a weathered woodsman who doesn't speak much, only nods, and occasionally leans down to examine a fallen limb. He's here to teach you something critical. Not all wood burns the same. In fact, choosing the wrong wood could mean a miserable night or worse. He stops beside a pile of split logs stacked neatly against a stone wall. Each row is labeled not with chalk or tags, but by look and feel. He points to a heavy, dark pile. Oak, he says, tapping it twice. Burns slow, hot, needs to be seasoned. He then motions to a lighter bundle, pale fibrous, alder. Burns fast, good for kindling. You nod like you understand, but the truth is, you've never thought of fire as having grades. In medieval times, wood wasn't just a resource, it was a language. Ash, beech, elm, birch, yew, willow. Each came with its own burning habits and folk associations. Ash was most prized, often called the poor man's oak, because it could burn green and was forgiving. Birch caught fire quickly, but hissed and popped if too fresh. Willow, damp and smoky, was a last resort. Elm was famously stubborn, difficult to split, but beloved in urban areas for how long it burned once tamed. Superstition shaped usage too. In parts of England, yew was avoided not just because it was toxic, but because of its association with graveyards. Alder, on the other hand, was thought to protect the hearth from evil spirits. Some even believed certain woods carried omens, burn hawthorn, and you risk bringing sickness. Burn rowan, and you invite protection. There was poetry in it. Medieval folk didn't just choose wood, they knew it. Oak logs will warm you well if they're old and dry. Birch logs burn too fast, but smell lovely when they die. These weren't just rhymes, they were survival guides disguised as lullabies. And so people became wood connoisseurs. A good woodsman was like a vintner able to select and blend logs for ideal heat and smoke levels. A cook might request a specific wood to avoid flavoring her stew with pine's acrid tang. A smith needed dense hardwood, while a spinner might prefer softer flames that didn't scorch her thread. Historians still argue whether this intimate wood knowledge was widespread or confined to rural craftsmen and foresters. But surviving guides, poems, and even marginalia scribbled in monastic cookbooks hint at a population deeply attuned to the forest's nuances. The woodsman finally hands you a log-seasoned ash, smooth and golden at the edges. "This one won't spit," he mutters. "Burns clean." You sling it under your arm like a medieval badge of honor. One log carefully chosen could warm a stew-dry a tunic and chase back the frost. Wood, after all, was never just wood. It was strategy, superstition, and science. You're standing inside a cramped village shop, the kind barely big enough to swing a goose in. There are no gleaming coins or ledgers here, just bundles, cords, and stacks of neatly tied twigs. And the shopkeeper, he's not weighing silver, he's counting firewood. Because in this village, kindling is currency. It's market day, and transactions are flying fast. A woman trades a double armful of seasoned birch twigs for a sack of barley. A hunched shepherd hands over a bundle of dry alder and receives a pair of woolen mittens. A boy, no taller than your waist, drags a sack of pine cones to the blacksmith's stall and walks away, clutching a metal pot. There's no need for scales. Everyone knows the value of wood here by touch, smell, and weight. A bundle of dry oak commands more than green willow. Ash, always a fair trade. Charcoal packed in leather sacks fetches a premium. You glance at the tally board scrawled on parchment. It's not gold or grain being tracked, it's cords and faggots. One cord icks 2 nights in the inn reads 1 note. 3 bundles equals 4 loaves of rye bread. The innkeeper, who also runs the tavern, openly prefers wood over coin. Can't eat silver. He shrugs, stacking a delivery of split beech. The inn's hearth roars with traded timber. Travelers contribute a bundle upon arrival. No firewood, no bed. It's not cruelty, it's efficiency. Keeping the fire going is a group project, and the villagers know it. You're more useful warm if you've paid your share in fuel. Even the church participates. On holy days, it distributes charity wood, 1 bundle. Per widow, 2 per family of 5. It's stacked under the porch, guarded by an old monk with frostbitten ears and a stern gaze. He checks names and waits. In tough years, wood scarcity turns the village into a quiet battlefield. Hoarding becomes common. Accusations fly. He's burning greenwood just to keep the smoke up, trying to look wealthier than he is. Someone hisses. Others barter secretly behind barns, passing off bundles in the dark. Historians still argue whether firewood as currency systems were formalized or simply improvised village by village. Some charters mention wood dues in lieu of tax. Others remain silent, but archaeological finds tiny bundles of fire-starting twigs stored in clay-lined pits hint at wood's economic role far beyond just fuel. You leave the shop with a newfound respect for the humble stick. It might not glitter, but it buys food, favors, and forgiveness. In a cold world where survival is a daily negotiation, firewood is wealth you can hold trade and burn. It's late February now, the cruel tale of winter, and you're in a village that's run out of wood, not metaphorically, literally. The last of the dry logs vanished 2 nights ago, and even the fence posts have been eyed suspiciously. This is what the peasants call the fireless months. Inside one of the huts, the air is dense with breath and silence. The hearth is dark, cold ash crumbling like spent parchment. There's no smoke rising from the chimney, no glow behind the iron grate. Everyone moves slower, not because they're tired, though they are, but because every movement risks letting in the cold. The family wraps themselves in every piece of fabric they own. A girl wears her mother's apron as a scarf. Her brother's feet are wrapped in old cheesecloth. They haven't bathed in weeks because heating water is a fantasy. The baby, bundled in 3 layers of damp wool, sleeps curled against a pig in the corner. The pig doesn't mind. Meals are eaten cold: yesterday's porridge, a dried apple hard cheese you have to gnaw, tea, boiling water. Forget it. Even the idea of a warm spoon is a luxury. Without wood fire becomes folklore. People tell stories of better winters of years when they had enough charcoal to roast chestnuts in January. Children sit around a dark hearth and imagine how lovely a warm fire would sound. One of them draws flames in the soot with a stick. You don't correct him. Imagination's doing more good than complaints right now. Survival depends on strategy. During the day, people crowd into the sunniest corners, desperate for any hint of warmth. At night, they double up in bed again, 3 heads under one woolen hood. When breath freezes on the inside of a window, they draw little hearts into it. Someone laughs. Laughter generates a bit of heat, too. A neighbor stops by with news. Someone found an old chest with wood inside 3 logs hidden behind a hay wall. You'd think they discovered treasure. The logs are split evenly between 3 households. They won't last long, but tonight there will be fire again. For an hour, maybe 2. Historians still argue whether these late winter shortages were widespread or just recorded more in famine-prone regions. But oral histories from across Europe describe these bleak weeks with remarkable similarity. Some families burned furniture, others shredded wattle walls for twigs. Entire towns resorted to communal fires, huge pits filled with anything that would catch flame. So now, as you lie back on your pile of hay eyes, fixed on the faintest light from the neighbor's fire, flickering through the window, you understand? Wood isn't just heat, it's hope. When it runs out, the cold isn't what hurts most, it's the silence where the crackling used to be. You're inside a 1-room cottage now, crouched low to avoid the smoky haze that clings to the air like wet cloth. The fire is burning, but just barely, and it's not the cheerful kind. This is a damp, sputtering flame fueled by whatever the family could scavenge: green branches, mossy twigs, maybe even a bit of cow dung. You cough softly. The smoke is inescapable. The smell gets into everything: your cloak, your hair, your throat. This is the reality for countless medieval families. Fire may be life, but it's not always clean. These homes often had no chimney, just a smoke hole in the roof. And when the weather turned rough, as it so often did, the hole was stuffed with cloth or covered with a wooden board. The smoke had nowhere to go but sideways. It fills the room, clings to walls, blackened with soot, and settles like fog over sleeping children. Eyes sting. Coughs never go away. But oddly enough, they've adapted. Beds are placed lower to the ground, where the air is marginally clearer. Cooking happens quickly. People learn to breathe shallowly. Children are taught to sit facing away from the fire, not for safety, but because the thickest smoke hangs where the draft pulls it. One curious side effect: the bugs stay away. Lice, fleas, gnats, they hate the smoke. And so, in a strange twist of misery, smoky houses are sometimes healthier than those with better ventilation. You trade clear lungs for fewer vermin. Not a fair trade, perhaps, but a common one. Some folks build smoke lofts, half floors, above the fire, where meat is cured and herbs dry. In winter, it becomes the warmest part of the house, though access is tricky. You'd have to climb over the rafters with a torch and not catch your foot on a beam. It's warmer up there, but you also might pass out from the fumes. There's a boy nearby sitting on a stool with a wet cloth over his nose. His mother swears it helps filter the smoke. His eyes are red and his breathing raspy. You ask if he's sick. She shrugs. It's just winter, she says. Historians still argue whether these smoky conditions caused widespread illness or simply chronic discomfort. Respiratory ailments were common, but hard to isolate from the many medieval hazards. What's clear is that smoke-filled homes were both a lifeline and a liability. You needed the fire to live, but sometimes it made you sicker while trying to keep you alive. And yet, you don't hear many complaints. For many, this is the only option. Warmth without wood is rare. Warmth without smoke, nearly impossible. And so they endure. You glance up, watching the smoke curl toward the low rafters like a weary ghost. You blink through the sting, pull your cloak tight, and exhale slowly. It's not cozy, but it's home. And for tonight, that will do. It's just after dusk, in a tight-knit village tucked against the edge of a dense wood. The snow is fresh moonlight bouncing off its crusted surface, and yet something darker moves beneath the peaceful exterior. You follow two boys, barely 15, creeping quietly through the shadows. They carry nothing but a rope and a hand axe wrapped in cloth. You're not hunting game, you're hunting wood. Wood theft. It's not romantic or brave, it's desperate and common. Especially when winter stretches long and stores run short. The boys stop at the back of a neighbor's cart shed. There's a stack of dry birch inside, carefully seasoned, split, and stolen once before. The boys hesitate. They whisper. Then one nods. They take 2 logs only, not enough to be noticed, but enough to stretch their family's hearth another day. This isn't an isolated event. All across the countryside, people steal firewood. From forests, from storage sheds, from manor stores, even from churches. Entire households take turns standing guard at night, not against wolves, but neighbors. You pass a woman sleeping near her hearth with a pitchfork across her lap. She's not afraid of freezing. She's afraid of losing what little warmth she has. Accusations fly even without proof. A man's door is found unlatched immediately. Someone whispers, "He's been stealing from the abbey pile." A child's mitten is seen near a private wood stack. That family doesn't show up to church the next morning. Then there are the feuds. Long-standing village rivalries suddenly ignite over a missing faggot of ash. People file complaints with the reeve or manor court. Punishments vary: fines, beatings, even public shaming. But the cycle continues. After all, laws don't keep you warm. Fire does. Sometimes it gets violent. In one grim tale, you hear by the fire, 2 brothers got into a brawl over a cartload of logs left unguarded near the mill. One ended up in the ditch with a broken nose. The other walked away with 3 days of heat. There's even an undercurrent of fuel espionage. People pretending to trade, then slipping lighter logs into the stack. Merchants who mix wet wood with dry. Families who hide their real stores behind false walls and empty barrels. Historians still argue whether these fuel wars were widespread enough to affect broader policy or simply symptomatic of tight-knit rural scarcity. But records from manorial courts suggest that disputes over firewood were among the most common winter offenses, more frequent than poaching and often more bitter. You walk past a hut with shuttered windows. Smoke curls from the chimney, and you know it wasn't all earned. But you say nothing. In this season, morality melts like ice over flame, and the warmth that comes from a stolen log feels no different on the skin. You wake before dawn in the quiet hush of a cloister. The monastery is still a world apart from the chaos of feuding villagers and smoldering thefts. Here, the firewood is stacked neatly. The hearths burn at predictable hours, and no one's wrestling neighbors over a birch branch. But don't be fooled. Monks worry about firewood too, just in their own rule-bound way. The cloister garden is dusted with frost. You pass a monk in a hooded habit, hauling a bundle of split ash toward the kitchen. He nods, but says nothing. Silence, after all, is part of the rule here. but the firewood speaks for him clean dry and already sorted by type. Monasteries were often self-sufficient, and that meant managing their own fuel supply. Some owned entire forests and hired lay brothers or local peasants to gather wood. Others bartered with nearby villages, offering medical care ale or scripture copying in exchange for logs. And yes, monks had their own secret reserves. Even God's servants need to keep warm. Inside, you find the kitchen surprisingly cozy. A single fire feeds the oven heat's water for the infirmary and warms the dormitory walls through cleverly designed flues. The monks have built hypocaust systems in some wealthier monasteries, early underfloor heating borrowed from Roman ideas. It's rare, but where it exists, it's a marvel. Warm feet in a stone building. Practically divine. Not every fire here is for comfort. The scriptorium, where monks copy texts, keeps a brazier burning, but only just. Ink mustn't freeze, but manuscripts also can't smell like smoke. So they strike a careful balanced fire, just warm enough for fingers to move, but not so strong that it blackens the vellum. Then there's the infirmary. This is where the fire glows brightest, especially in winter. The rule of Saint Benedict says to care for the sick above all else, and warmth is part of that care. A single monk tends to the hearth there all night, feeding it like a sacred duty. Even the chapel isn't immune. During early morning prayers, small braziers are lit behind the choir stalls. They don't warm the whole room, but they keep frostbite at bay for the brothers' feet and fingers. Candles do the rest, flickering alongside chants. Historians still argue whether monasteries hoarded firewood at the expense of their tenants or shared it generously in hard years. Some records suggest charity distributions of fuel. Others hint at quiet stockpiles maintained while nearby villages froze. As you sip weak ale in the refectory, warmed by a nearby hearth, you realize monks had one key advantage order. No fights, no thefts, no desperation. Just a system, a schedule. Logs measured fires, timed warmth, allocated like prayer. It wasn't luxury, but it was enough. And in winter, enough is holy. You step into a village square, glowing with flickering torchlight. It's the heart of winter now. But for once, no one seems to care. The air smells of pine smoke and roasting chestnuts. Children race around a bonfire twice their height. Laughter echoes through the frozen air. Welcome to the ember-lit heart of winter festivity, the fire-fueled celebration. Tonight is Yule, or maybe it's Candlemas or Imbolc, depending on where you are and which calendar your local priest follows. The name doesn't matter. The fire does. This festival, like so many others, is built around flame. When the world is dark and cold, you fight back with heat and light. In one corner, villagers toss dry sprigs of holly into the fire, making wishes as they flare. In another, a blacksmith has laid out a small forge to demonstrate ironwork, half display, half entertainment, and more than a little bragging. And near the ale barrels, someone is retelling the legend of the Yule log, a sacred piece of wood chosen with care, decorated with ribbons, and burned slowly across several nights to protect the home for the coming year. You see families sharing stories beside braziers, each one set up in a ring to keep the square warm. No one argues over firewood tonight. It's been pooled, saved, and donated for this moment. Even the wealthier families sent logs. Not out of charity, out of tradition. And the fire isn't just symbolic, it's strategic. These long winter nights can be bleak, and a mid-season celebration helps fend off despair. The food tastes better. Beside flame, the songs sound fuller, and the world just for tonight feels a bit brighter. A woman passes you with a tray of baked apples, steam rising from the tray like a prayer. She grins and waves you over to the fire, where elders tell stories older than parchment of dragons, slain saints who summoned spring, and witches who danced on snowflakes. No one cares whether they're true. The heat makes everything feel real. In the church, candles line the aisle in tight clusters, casting warm halos on the stone floor. A low chant hums through the nave. The priest says a blessing over the firewood stacked at the rear, a tradition in some parishes where even logs are sanctified. Historians still argue whether these winter fire festivals stemmed more from pagan rites or Christian reframing. But whatever the origin, one thing remains unchanged. People need fire. For warmth, yes, but also for hope. Tonight, flames do more than heat fingers. They soften the sharp edge of the season. They gather people close. And as you look around the square, cheeks flushed and eyes shining, you understand something ancient and enduring. In winter, the fire is not just a flame, it's a promise. The snow has started again, soft, slow, and silent. You're on the edge of a windswept village where the frost clings thickly to the thatched rooftops, and your breath is a thin fog in the starlight. It's here, near the last hut at the bend in the road, that you hear the story of the last log. Everyone in the village knows it. It's passed down each year like a winter rite. Long ago, maybe a century, maybe more, a storm swallowed the region for weeks. The wood ran out. Even the most careful families found themselves staring at empty stacks. The river froze solid. The livestock died. And then the cold crept in. One cottage stood at the edge of the woods, farther than most dared to live. Inside, a widow and her grandson kept a single log behind the hearth, hidden untouched. It was curved like a crooked smile and smelled faintly of resin and wild mushrooms. They called it the promise log, saved for the worst day of winter, but no one ever defined what that day was. And then came the worst night. Wind howled. The sky vanished. Frost crept along the inside of the shutters. The boy's fingers turned purple. The widow wept. And still, they didn't burn it. Instead, they lit a candle and placed the log on the table. Around it, they gathered every soul they could find. Neighbors crammed into the tiny hut, 30, maybe 40 people, elbow to elbow, wrapped in quilts. Children sleeping on laps. Old men humming lullabies to stay awake. They sang through the night. The logs stayed cold, but the people stayed warm. By morning, the wind broke. The sun returned weak, but shining. The snow stopped. And the promise, log still whole. They burned it together, not for survival, but for celebration. Today, that same crooked log sits in the village hall, preserved, lacquered, mounted in a case like a relic. Every winter, the villagers gather and light a single candle beside it. They tell the story to children, and they remind each other. Fire is life, but shared fire is salvation. Historians still argue whether the tale is true or folktale, But if you ask the villagers, they'll point to the case, the candle, and the plaque etched with three words, "Keep one back." And in that quiet moment, you realize the firewood wasn't worth more than gold because it was rare. It was worth more because it brought people together, because it warmed more than skin. It warmed hearts. It held off the dark. It made the cold survivable. And sometimes, just sometimes, it gave people a reason to hope for spring.